Welcome to the Until Jesus Runs This Campus podcast. I am your host, Lauren, and I am so excited to get to spend a little bit of time today just sharing with you guys some advice, all of the things about God and the Bible and church, and all of the fun things. Today, I get to be joined by our college pastor at our church, Cody. We are a part of T-Rock, which stands for Timber Ridge on Campus, which is our local kind of church college campus ministry. And so we get to minister to college students every week, typically between like 400 and 600 students, which is really, really fun. And Cody kind of gets to lead the charge on it. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, it's been fun. I've been here for about a year now leading this. And so it's been absolutely amazing. It's exactly where God has me in this moment. And so it's fun that we get to finally get this going because we've talked about this for so long. And it's actually kind of surreal that we actually get to record this and do it. And so it's cool. So part of my job is just in general, just obviously people just think, oh, you're just writing sermons, and it's not. We also have a college league team that's about anywhere from 10 to 14 people that are just college students. And, you know, the T-Rock mantra, as you would say, really comes from the title of this podcast, which is Until Jesus Runs This Campus. But that comes from Timber Ridge Churches. Yeah. It's literally on our back wall, and it says, Until Jesus Runs This Town. And so it's good that we get to do this podcast, and it's not even just a podcast for just college campuses, but high school campus, but it's meant for a younger audience with it. And so it's really cool. And I think when we decided it, I told you, I said, I'll help start it in different things, but you know, I'm not in that season anymore since I just graduated about a year ago. So we'll have people on the podcast that are not in college that can provide perspective on different things. But that's why we want you to do it, because we couldn't find a better host because of all the things that you provide. So it's really cool that we get to do this, and I'm excited.
All right, well, we are going to kick off today. We got the chance to ask some of our Instagram followers for our college ministry account kind of what they wanted to hear from this podcast. Like Cody said, it's been something we've talked about for a really long time. And so we've gotten a lot of input from all of our college students around here. And so today the questions that we'll be talking about are questions that those students have asked, and as well as just continuing through the podcast and the rest of the semester and all of these episodes, we'll get to kind of answer questions that real college students are asking, which I think is really cool. So today, just kind of going along with the theme of starting new things and starting the new podcast for us, we're going to talk about kind of like starting points for your walk with Christ, your learning how to read the Bible, what prayer looks like for somebody who's new in their faith, what that relationship with God looks like, and all of the fun things. So to start off, and our first question that we have is, where should you start in the Bible if you've never been active in the Word before, or what's the best place to start reading? So for somebody who's kind of never been in the Word before, doesn't know where to start, where would you recommend?
Well, I would think that it's very scary, and it feels very daunting. And before we even continue, we want this to be very genuine. Like, my nose itches really bad right now. But the point of it is to be that, like, we don't want to cut that out. We want to keep it very genuine. And like, for an example, it's literally the first episode. So we're figuring out the cameras, we're figuring out the audios. So we want it to be as genuine as possible with it. And the funny part about it is, like, that's why we have our phones. Like, I have notes on it. You gave me the questions of what we were talking about, but I haven't really looked up a lot of it. But if someone were just coming up straight up to me, what I would say and what I've learned for it is, you can never go wrong starting in the Gospels, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. And so, and even then though, like, you sit there and going, Cody, are you struggling with the Gospels a little bit? I'm trying to think off the top of my head if Romans is included in it. It is, or it isn't? I don't think it is.
I don't think so.
It is, guys. Is it? It's not. Okay, they're shaking their head. By the way, we have two people back here, James and Taylor. They're back here running the camera and stuff like that too. We would show a camera angle of that, but we don't have that set up yet. But coming in the future. So I promise I'm not talking to a crazy person over here, or I'm just imagining things. But like, that's the point of it. Like, I don't want people to think that just because of my position, like, there's things that are expected of me to know, but that doesn't mean I'm any better or anything, stuff like that. But going back to the actual question, the point of it is to learn who Jesus is. And so you're going to learn who Jesus is through those gospels, those first, those first beginning few books in the New Testament. And also a good one too is always Proverbs, because I think there's 30 or 31 chapters, so you can do one every single day, and it's just so much wisdom, and that's in the Old Testament. So for me, that's a good starting point. I don't know about
I've heard. I worked at a summer camp this summer, so I got to kind of work with a lot of people who shared in my faith, and it's always fun to go to summer camp, and it was fun to do it for a whole summer. But they said the same thing, that they would go through Proverbs every month, and they would reread it every month, and every month they learned something new from it. So I think that's really good. My favorite book to read in is Psalms. I love Psalms. I feel like it has so much insight into like the Bible and the story of Christ and all of that stuff, and I learned something literally every day from reading it. And then I didn't realize, like, with working at the summer camp that I worked at, we focused on like Genesis and talking about Adam and Eve and all of that stuff, and even just getting to teach that to kids, I didn't realize how much like I didn't even know about that story. And so I think starting even in Genesis at the beginning of the Bible is a great place to start. I don't necessarily think that there's a wrong place to start in the Bible, and oftentimes I'll even be reading in the Bible, or I'll go through my plan of like Psalms, and I'll read a chapter and I won't really like get anything out of it, and I'll just take a second and pray and be like, God, what do you have for me to read today? And sometimes that will literally be like flipping to wherever in the Bible, and he speaks to me.
That is so good, because people don't, I think part of it is inviting God into those moments, because a lot of times we're not in a moment to, we just have busy lives.
Right.
And so we don't sit there and invite God into moments in general, because we're just so busy, but especially in those moments, that's so good that you said that, because that's something that I've seen in my own walk with that. And so it's really cool. But that's really smart, is in just inviting in. And that can lead, if you start doing that in your prayer life or your devotional life or whatever it is, even if it's like getting up in the morning and you're reading the Bible verse of the day on the Bible app, if you would just invite God in that moment, read the scriptures, 9 times out of 10, you're going to understand or get that scripture more.
Right.
And it's crazy, because even the Bible verse of the day, I swear, like almost every day I'm going, goodness gracious, this is exactly what I need for the day. So that, just inviting him into that, and that opens the doors to invite him into the rest of the part of your life too, because it starts your day off that too. And I always recommend in the mornings. It's hard, especially if you try and like work out and you have school or work, whatever, and then you do it in the mornings. But it's so good, I think, to start in the mornings with it. Now, maybe if you're somebody who likes doing it 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, which it can literally be 5 minutes, and if you just read the Bible verse of the day every day, that will change your life.
Yeah.
But I think we complicate it so much.
Yes.
So if you just do that, I think it will dramatically change your life and how you see the world.
The Bible app too has really good like devotionals and stuff. And I love reading Sadie Robertson's devotionals. I think every Christian girl does. But I think like there's devotional books that you can get, but also literally for free on the Bible app you can get devotions, which I feel like that's also like, if you're really struggling with a place of like, I don't understand this, devotions, I like them because a lot of times they'll give you the scripture and then they'll kind of explain like what it means, and it helps me understand. Even, years into my relationship with Christ, still I like struggle when I'm like, what does it say? What does it mean?
They're also written for those, like you can go find the most famous people in the Christian community that have written on for the Bible app, and they can go from anywhere from 2 to 3 days to a whole year long, because I know you can do the read the Bible in 365 days. So
I tried to do that, it didn't work.
So I think that's where you kind of start with it. So it's a good spot to start.
Yeah.
And then I think where you continue to grow is there's something I think powerful of like, you have yours right there.
Yeah.
But actually reading it and not reading it on your phone, and putting your phone away, I think there's something powerful with that. Especially if you have, like, I have a men's study Bible, men's everyday Bible, and so on the bottom it has the description of it. So sometimes I'll read it and I'm going, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And then on the bottom it kind of it gives you kind of like a Spark Note version of what you just read, and it helps to
Yeah.
understand those moments too.
Right. All right. Well, on to the next question. We got asked kind of a lot of questions about prayer. And so, like, how do you start with prayer? What does prayer look like maybe for you? And then one in specific was, like, if you've been praying for years and you're just not feeling God anymore, like, what would you recommend for people who feel that way?
This is such a great question.
Yeah.
I think with all of this, you know, I heard this recently where in your prayer life, if every one of your answers got answered today, would only your life change? And I think that the moment we start praying for other people's happiness and other people's, you know, moments, and you're praying for those kind of stuff, I think it is a huge step in the right direction with it, because that is serving and it's thinking of others instead of yourself all day long. And I think that is one way with it. But when you begin to see God work in those moments, is I do think that in those prayer life that you're inviting into it, and it's taking an honest look of your prayer life, and are you just asking for God everything, or are you thanking him too, thanking him for being in those situations? Because, you know, in scriptures, it doesn't tell us that all things are going to be good. They say they work for good. And so there may be a season of your life that you're going through something, and it's going to help you in the long run with something, right? And a lot of times we don't see that till many years later. And then answering the question where it's, I've been doing it for years, but I really don't feel God. I think that is such a difficult spot to be in, because I remember, I don't remember if you know this, but we did one of my favorite messages I was able to preach on a Wednesday was I was talking about, or I think I might have done it on a Sunday, but it was talking about how prayer works.
Yeah.
And God, there's a song, because I love country music, and we're in Texas, if you don't know where Stephenville is. But, yeah. But I love Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
And there's a song that he says, unanswered prayers. And he says, I thank God for unanswered prayers. And while the song's amazing, and Garth Brooks sounds amazing in it, I don't think that's true. I don't think that there's unanswered prayers that God has. Right. It is either yes, no, or not right now.
Yeah.
Right? And we'll never know what that is. We don't know why that, we will never be able to figure that out. Sometimes why he just flat out says no.
Yeah.
And so that's where you say, well, how am I feeling? That is where I would say recommend either, I wouldn't say necessarily join a life group, but join a community where you can talk about them. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, well, you're not feeling God because you don't see me like, that's so naive for me to say.
Right.
I truly think that every situation is different, and then you should go to somebody and talk about it, so then they can talk to you about whatever that situation is. Because if I give you advice, be like, well, why is God not answering my prayers? Well, somebody could have passed away that was important in your family, and then the advice I'm giving is like not as impactful.
Yeah.
Right? Or it can be just, I wouldn't say just a homework assignment, but it could be a homework assignment too. And so drastically different situations, but just because somebody else's situation is a 10 doesn't mean, and another person says 10 does not mean, oh, well, this is worth less than this other one, right? So that's what I would say with it.
Yeah. I think something kind of that I have often like seen is that I think, and I was literally listening to a podcast earlier where a girl was talking about this, that often like we'll pray, and kind of what you were saying, like there's not necessarily unanswered prayers, but I think a lot of times we miss the answers that God gives us to prayers because we are so set that, oh, I'm going to pray like, God, will you give me a boyfriend? And if he's not giving you a boyfriend, well, then he's not listening to me. He's not answering my prayer. But in reality, because you're so focused on what you want from that prayer, you're not open to necessarily hearing what God wants. And so, like you said, that's not in every situation. But I think a lot of times we have to just kind of shift our focus from where we want or what we want to, yeah, this is what I want, and God, I would love if you provide this for me, but I'm also open if that's not in the timing right now. And I literally, like, I'll share a little bit about my story, but I went through, like, a rough breakup a little over a year ago, and at that point, I was upset, because, like, I feel like every girl when you're in college especially, or honestly anybody. You see relationships around you, and I was really active in the church, and I seen all these really godly relationships, and I was like, God, I just want that. Like, why are you not blessing me with that? And I got to a place where I was finally like, you know what, God, it's yours. I'm fine. I'm happy. I'm healthy. And I'm in a place where now I don't have that commitment where I can do more of what you've called me to do. And literally we were sitting after church one night. We kind of, when all of the revival stuff was happening, we had played, I'm sure you remember this, some extra songs and just kind of worshiped late, like 2 hours after our regular college night was supposed to last. And after the band had gotten off of like the stage and stuff, they all came and sat down, and James, who's my now boyfriend,
who's running our sound, by the way,
yeah,
right now. He's right behind, and his cheeks are so red right now. He's wearing a purple shirt, but it looks about, that's what his face kind of looks like. It's the color of his shirt.
But he was sitting in the just one of the rows of chairs, and I walked up to him and just sat, and I looked at him and I was like, are you okay? Are you sad? Are you tired? Or like, are you just taking this in? And he looked at me and he said, I'm just taking it in. And I sat there for a few minutes just in silence next to him and was praying over him. And in that moment, I felt God tell me. And me and James knew each other, but we were not close. We weren't even really like friends at the time. And I felt God be like, this is who you're going to marry one day. And I literally, and I tell people this all the time, I was like, okay, God, like, but now we've been dating for almost a year, and for sure 100% I know that God is living out that plan that he told me almost over a year ago now. And so I think it's just, you have to focus on, kind of going back to what I was saying, is like you have to focus on where God wants you right now and put your feet where God has you right now and not in the next step. Because if you keep trying to step forward and forward and forward to where you want, you're going to end up falling and missing, you know, all the in between that God had for you. And so,
well, and also to say this 100% truthfully, and you would agree with this, I'm assuming, is that God uses you in your season of singleness, because I don't believe that, and I went through something similar in that, but it was a 2-year stretch. And so I got in the relationship that I am in now, and Heather will 100% be my wife one of these days. And the point is that I didn't realize that moment too, and I was struggling. But then I realized that I wasn't able to see, you know, what God had for me with our relationship, because I had to focus on what I cared about, what I did. And you can't do that in a relationship. You have to do that in a season of singleness where you're finding yourself in those moments. You have to understand, okay, what is important? What do I want in a relationship? What do I want? What am I willing to not necessarily sacrifice, but what is important to me? What are deal breakers? What are not? And you learn that through relationships, but I think people think
you will never be able to figure out your life in a relationship. And I'm so adamant about that. I'm like, I hate when people are like, oh, so-and-so is just going to come into my life and they're going to fix everything. And I'm like, no, they're not.
Yeah. Well, because you can't be fixed. And I think that's where people go into a relationship and they're like, oh, they're going to fix. Or another bad part of it too, and I've done this too, is you like try to fix them and you think, oh, I got to fix them, or, oh, I see potential in them. I could see that they have all these great qualities, but their relationship with God or isn't quite there. So I'll invite them to church. I'll get there and I'll grow, and going, no, that's not how it works.
I used to get so mad at my parents because they were like, you can't date somebody that's not a Christian. And I was like, well, everybody needs Christ. And then I found out what missionary dating was, and like, you can't date somebody and expect them like to convert them. Like, that's on their own. You know, like, that's something you have to figure out on your own, but you have to be, like, with somebody who equally, like, yokes you. And I know it's talked about so much in the church, but genuinely, like, if you are constantly trying to drag somebody up with you, and nothing wrong with somebody who's newer in their faith or somebody who doesn't have a faith yet or anything like that, but if you are somebody who's super strong in your faith, you cannot expect to, like, go find some hot mess at the bar and be like, oh, don't worry, I'm going to fix him. Like, no, you're not. Yeah. That is not your job to do.
And what's funny is this is not in our notes at all to talk about. But this is how passionate we are about it, because equally yoked, I learned, I remember having a conversation with my dad, and I said, and I was struggling at that time where I was single. And I went, he goes, do you think your mom and I are equally yoked? And I said, absolutely. Been together 25 years, was raised in, I call it a second generation Christian because they were not raised in a Christian home and so I got that privilege. And I go, absolutely. And he goes, well, who spends more time in the Word, me or your mom? And I go, absolutely, Mom, not even a question. He goes, so how are we equally yoked? And I thought it was always like, I spend 45 minutes, she spends 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I read, I listen to Christian music, she listens to Christian music. And that's not what it is. What it is this, you're going to mess up in a relationship and you're going to just find hurt and you're going to hurt yourself and them if they're number one priority or if you make Christ a priority because of them. If you sit there. Now, that doesn't mean they can't change and be like, okay, God, but God has to be priority because the list that people do is they think it's like spouse, kids, God. No, God is first. So like for you and James, I'll use you and James for an example is that you should be, it should be God, your relationship with God, James, obviously when you get married, right? And then family, and then job. Like, and sometimes those first two, that's how it stays, right? I saw this amazing thing from Craig Rochelle, and he said that he would always like go home and all the kids would be on, and they'd be like, Dad. He would come up, and they would all like hug him and stuff like that. But he would go, Mama gets the first kiss. Mama gets the first kiss. And it's such a small act, but it's to let it know, like, in the busyness of life, like that is what matters first. But it's God first, and then His for you should be, God, Lauren, right? That's how it should work. And if that is the correct order, everything else sometimes will get out of whack, and that happens in life. But if those two, when you're married, that is what successful part of it looks like. So,
well, let's get off of our tea time of relationships. I could go on all day about it, but
also, if you have any questions about anything with this, we are always accepting questions on that. I mean, if we want to do a whole, if people were asking for a whole relationship one, then I would love to. Taylor's sitting right here. She's actually doing the cameras for us, and I know she would be very interested in talking about it too. And so, yeah.
All right. Well, our next question, kind of just going on the same bandwagon of all of the ways to start. How do you worship? And so I think kind of what this person was talking about was when they're in a room worshiping at church or wherever it is, and you kind of, I think human nature is to kind of cower down and be like, oh, I don't want to sing too loud, or my voice isn't worship team worthy. And so for people who kind of allow that to, like, I guess, get the best of them, what would you recommend? What is worship to you? How do you worship? How do you see that?
Well, I'm very passionate about this, but I actually want you to answer this first, because I know that this is a topic that is pretty important to you with it. We're actually doing a night here, which I guess if people don't know this, because the people that are at T-Rock, this will come out before we even do this, so they'll kind of get a little sneak peek. But we're going to do a night of worship at T-Rock. I mean, we haven't done it in a while, but it'll look different than just a normal night of worship. It'll look, we'll be able to explain different things and have different speakers, and it'll be a really cool night. But I would love to hear your take on this first before I talk to him.
Well, for me, I think, like, worship in the sense of, like, music has always been kind of like a steady for me, like, in everything that I've been to. That is the way that I often feel connected to God the most, and I know that a lot of people can relate to that. And so I think, and I came from a Baptist church, which, no hate on the Baptist churches, my parents still go there, but I think especially in the church that I was at, where there was a lot of older people, it's kind of like you're raising your hands, you look weird, like, you're on your knees, what are you doing? Like, and I think being at T-Rock and seeing, like, an environment that, definitely the environment has helped me, but just seeing that it's okay to, like, actually worship. Like, worship isn't just singing the songs, and for some people that can be, but I think also, like, worship is what you make out of it. And so I oftentimes will, like, catch myself literally, like, with my eyes closed, like, falling forward on the front row because I'm just so into it, because to me it's like that is a moment between you and God. And so I think, And obviously it takes time to kind of get out of the mindset of like, what do the people around me think? Because I can tell you, like, I have my shower singing voice, and like that is where what I sing. Like James will tell you, James is helps run our worship team, and I'm like, I'll joke with him all the time. I'm like, do you think I could be on the worship team? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, don't lie to me.
Oh, so nice.
But I was always in kind of that like mindset of like, oh, you know, can so-and-so next to me hear me? Like, are they getting distracted by my worship? But at the end of the day, if somebody beside you is getting distracted by the way you sing, then they're not in the right mindset.
That's so true.
And so I think, again, just it is what you make it. Like, there's times, and sometimes it's not often, but there's times where I feel so, like, our last T-Rock was literally so spiritual, and you could just feel the Holy Spirit. And had I not been in a knee brace, because I just had knee surgery, I would have been on my knees. I texted James, and I was like, that was some knee, like, on my knees worship, but I couldn't. And so I think it's just kind of the environment that you put yourself in and what you get out of it. And so I think, again, just kind of harp on, like, if somebody else beside you is worried about what you sound like, or if you're distracting them, then they're not in the right mindset. And that is, at the end of the day, something for them and God to fix. But then also I was actually talking to Taylor about this earlier yesterday, that worship also isn't just like singing. Worship is what you make it. And so Taylor, for instance, runs a bakery. She makes amazing cookies and cakes and all the things.
Yeah,
and
shout
so
out to
she
Cammy's
was
Cookies.
Yeah, shout out to Cammy's Cookies if you're local.
Yeah.
But she was telling me like that is how she worships, is in giving that time to God and baking. And so yeah, she's making money from that, and yeah, it's products that she's selling to people, but that time that she is using to make those cookies is her time with God. And so I often hear people that are like, I'm so busy with sports, like I can't be at church, or I'm so busy in this or that I can't, commit. Well, give your time in sports to God. Give your time in practice to God. Give that time to God. Just because like worldly things are taking up your time doesn't mean that time can't be given to God. So I think in a sense of like, yes, a lot of people look at worship as singing and worshiping at church, but worship is really anything that you do that you are giving to God.
Yeah, the definition, I just looked it up, of worship is the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity or deity, Deity. How do you say that word? Deity. Okay. Yeah. Basically like another being, I guess, of it. And so that can be in anything you can do. That can be what most people hear it as is worship, as in, literally worshiping or music, right? For me, that is my favorite form of it, but mainly with my one-on-one time with God. Mm-hmm. I can still hear and see God moving in my life if I'm consistently listening to Christian music and I'm not in the Word. Now, I'm not saying just listen to Christian music and don't get in the Word, because there's something powerful that happens when you read the words of God and you are in the Bible and you're just actually reading it, not just reading it through a screen. I don't know what it is, but it's so much more powerful in my opinion. And that's another form of worship, because you are just seeing the works of God and seeing how He moves in your life. And the way that you see that is by literally worshiping Him through everything that you do. And so if it's just that, the admiration, you're just thanking Him and saying, because at the end of the day, every Christian should understand, like, there's no person that's better than anybody else. Like, somebody have all done this, and, it's, even if there's a sin that you're doing publicly versus someone who's doing it privately, God sees it in the same light. Yeah. It doesn't mean that this person, now the public image could be different, right? And how people view you, that could obviously change, and that's the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how God sees you is the same, right? And I think people condemn one another for that, because it's like a public thing, and there's like, oh, well, this sin is more, like people are gonna be like, like that, and that's just humans. But in God's eyes, He doesn't do that. It's all the same in that side. So I think that is where people get that wrong in it. But for me on that worship, I love listening to music, and I think there's something that, especially understanding the words for it, when you can understand those words in a song, it is so impactful, And you hit on it earlier, but my favorite part about talking about it is a moment between you and God. And if that is what is at the forefront of your mind, then that's all that matters. And that is where, like, if you feel like, I think people will explain this, but why do you get on your knees? Why do you, put your hands out? For me at least, is when I'm on my knees, it's normally I'm going through a season where I just need to give it up. I need to give it to God. That's what it is. So I'm showing not only people around me, but it's saying when you do that in public, it is really powerful because you're letting everybody else know what that moment is. And that's saying, God, I don't care who's around me. I don't care what's going on. I am going to show you that I need to give something up. I need to do something, right? And then if I have my hands out like this and I'm praising this way, I'm just praising because we don't deserve it. We don't deserve to be saved. We're all full of sin, and we just get to be, and it's amazing we get to do that, right? And if I have my palms or my hands like this, that means like, God, I need your strength. I need him to show me something or something like that. And those are like 3 simple ways for it, for at least me. I know not everybody does it, but at least that's how I do it when we're at a church or we're doing it. And sometimes it's even like in my room. I'm doing those same things too, because there's something, same thing with even like in the prayer life, is audibly speak, like audibly talk out loud, because there's a difference between just singing in your head, and when you say it out loud, it's super uncomfortable because you kind of sound like a crazy person when you think it is. But that's what I would say for it. So
yeah. That was good. Okay. So this question will be kind of geared for more of like young adults or college students, but I know this was something that was harped on me so much when I moved to college, was like the importance of finding a church. And so like you grow up as a student or an adult, or not an adult, as a student or a kid, and even like all of our kids that are involved with our youth are a lot of kids that their parents just come and attend the church. And so you grow up in this environment of where you just kind of go where your parents go, and moving out as a young adult or to college is kind of the first time that you're off on your own. And I know that can be hard for a lot of people. So what are like some tips from you on like finding that church home when you move off? Like what were important things for you that you looked for when moving to college? All of those kind of things.
One simple word: Google.
Yeah.
No, I say that jokingly, but I also am serious at the same time. So Tarleton was my second school, and both times I went to a school called University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, or UTRGV for short, and that's in Edinburg, Texas. And if you don't know where Edinburg, Texas is, literally look at a map of Texas, go all the way down to the bottom of the tip, and basically next to Mexico, and that's where it's at, right? So it was a pretty Hispanic population. I think the school was 92% Hispanic, and so. And I say that because when I went down there and I was on Google, I literally just saw all these Spanish-speaking churches. Like literally the names are in Spanish, and I would love to speak Spanish. I can't speak Spanish, so definitely can't understand somebody else say it. I can count numbers, that's about it, and ask Puedo ir al baño, like where's the bathroom, or can I go to the bathroom, please? That's about it. But for me, I literally went on Google and I was just like churches in Edinburg. Yeah. And I looked, and the first place I found was the Family Church. I was like, oh, English was literally when I first saw the title of the church. And then I went, and then I fell in love with it. Yeah. Obviously, I think if you have a certain denomination that you want to look for, then that works too. But I kid you not, like most people nowadays have websites, and that's a great way to start at least. And then the exact same thing happened when I transferred from there to Stephenville and I came to Tarleton. I literally looked up churches. Timber Ridge Church was the first one that I looked up, and it's literally how it happened. And it happened to be that I didn't have to go to multiple churches, and I know that's not easy for everybody, but I just fell in love with it immediately. And both times I started getting into serving because I knew it was in my heart to serve, and it was just immediate. Like I just got involved immediately with that, and so I think that is where the biggest mistake I think people make is they struggle trying to find their old church. And let me tell you something, you're not going to.
Period.
You're not going to find, you may found a version of it or something like that. And especially if you came from a fantastic church at home, then, and you absolutely love that church, it's going to be hard to find that new church. So I think putting that on a pedestal and a standard, which I don't think is terrible, but it's going to make it hard to find a new church, especially if you're a freshman and you're coming into college for the first time and you're on your own for the first time and you're trying to figure out like what place do I want to go, because you get to choose. You get to choose where to go, and it's really your first big, like, not really necessarily adult decision, but it is like, what am I going to spend my time on Sundays if I go, even if I do go. And I think that is where I think a lot of people just go, oh, I go here, and they just think, well, I'm going to absolutely find something better. Like, I'm going to find something better. And if you feel like it's right and it's an 8 out of 10 and it's not, oh, well, it doesn't make up quite to the standard of my old church, then, and that's okay. Yeah. But also, we're not going to condemn you if you go to T-Rock Timber Ridge Church. Like, the most important thing is if you get plugged in. I think that's the most important thing. Your freshman year in college and in high school too is like, you're going through so many things. You're learning how to be your own human, really, and make your own decisions. And so the biggest thing that people want to take away is it's easy to take away Sundays. We can both tell you right now that Lauren and I had times where we've led, how long have we been together leading, volunteering at Timber Ridge?
This is my 5th year.
5th year. Okay, so she's been here longer than I have with it. But I got here in 2020.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess I started serving then also mainly when I got on lead team was in that fall of 20, and which is crazy because that was COVID and everything else. But for me, that was such a crazy time because we have both, I was on the baseball team at that time, and we could both tell you stories, or we could tell audiences stories of like, there were times where we were out, at least I was, I'll tell you mine, where I was driving friends around because I was the DD for the baseball team and stuff like that, driving guys around 2, 3, 4 a.m. and I get up and I got to be at church at 8 a.m. that next morning in a few hours, and I would be dragging, right? And there'd be times where you could see other lead team members that were doing that, and I don't think that's a sense of to necessarily condemn. It seasons of lives for people, but the important thing is that you're making church a priority and making it be there, because it's so easy to just push it off. And I think if you continue to pour in and continue, I think that's part of your testimony too, is like there was a season of your life where, you know, church and stuff like that was hard to go to.
I literally could not walk into this building for a solid year without crying.
Yeah.
And a lot of the T-Rock services and Sunday services were sat in the cafe. Just, I knew I needed to be in this building, but mentally I was not there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think for me, it was really harped on of you need to find a church, you need to find a church, you need to find a church. And honestly, when I came, I was excited, but I wasn't oh, let me find the church that I'm going to go to. That, I don't know. That just wasn't, I guess, where my priority was.
How did you find, I don't know the story. How did you find the church?
This is why I always tell, I get to do a lot with our volunteers at T-Rock, and I always harp on, that outreach that we do on campus is so, so important, because my first day of freshman year, I was walking from my dorm, and I remember I was going to the Grant building, and which is one of our buildings with classes on campus, and I was stopped right in front of the Student Center by Allison Roberts.
Oh, yeah.
She handed me a bag of donut holes and a connection card to come to church, and I had planned on going to the BSM because from what I understood, which I've never actually been to the BSM, is that they kind of help students find an actual church home to go to on Sundays.
That is what they do.
And so that was what my plan was, to just start going there and figure out. But thankfully, not thankfully that I didn't have to go to the BSM, but thankfully that God literally placed Allison in my life at that moment. And my hall that I lived in my freshman year got really super close. And I came back and invited them all, and we had probably a group of 10 people. We piled up into a car and we drove here, and I attended one T-Rock service, and then I was I need to start volunteering. And I had a lab that semester that went until 9 o'clock, which is when our college ministry starts. And I would come running. If she let us out late, I would come, or early, I would come running and being where can I serve at? And so God blessed me with that, really quick, and I am very thankful for that, and Timber Ridge has been my home ever since. But even then, you couldn't have told me that I would be doing what I'm doing now. And I'm so blessed with what God has given me. But I think also it's so, so important to realize that, and I tell people this all the time, because James and I have even had friends who have been you know, like, I want to go to T-Rock with y'all, but that's just not really the place that I feel connected to God. And I'm like, if that is another college ministry in town that you feel more connected to, like, go get Jesus there. Like, to me, and I think we talk about this to our leadership team all the time. It's like, it's not necessarily about the numbers that we have in this building, because I'm so passionate about it. But I will say all the time, like, we can have 400 students in this building, and if one of them accepted Christ or one of them was impacted, I would rather have 10 students in this building every Wednesday and all 10 feel impacted than have 400 students and only one feel Christ. And so it's not about the numbers. It's not about necessarily where you find your church home. It's the fact that you do find a church home. And so if you go to a church and you're just like, this is great, they're doing great, you know, like, people are feeling Christ, but that's not for me, like, that's totally okay. Like, my church back at home, I go back now and I'm like, you know, I feel connected here. And so this is my church home now. And so I go there and I'm like, oh, the worship isn't as good. You know, the drummer isn't as loud as our drummer is here. But my grandpa, who's in his 80s, found Christ at that church. And so, yeah, it wasn't the church for me, but it reached my grandfather, who had never been a Christian before, who a few years ago could barely walk, and went and walked up to the baptistry and got baptized and has given his life to Christ. And so it's not for me, but it's for him. And so this church may not be for you, but it's for me. And I think as long as you find a church, and any church that doesn't respect you leaving to find a home that better fits you, is not one that's Christ-centered to begin with. And so I think you have to put your walk with Christ before anybody else around you. And I think it's just important to try churches until you find your home. And a church should feel like your home. And I think for a lot of people, they've said that they walk into this place and they feel at home, and that's why they've stayed. But then I'm sure there's dozens of people every Sunday that come and don't feel at home here. And it sucks, and I wish that we could be that home for everybody. But also I'm like, if another church in town is giving you feel more at home there, then go experience Christ wherever you feel at home. And so I think that is just the most important thing, especially like Cody said, like, this is your first real, like, thing that you're doing as an adult. It's your first real, especially in your walk with Christ. You're having to find your walk with Christ, not your parents' walk with Christ anymore, if you haven't already. And so I think it's important to put you first. And so my parents, when they first started coming here, they were like, this is so different. But now my parents will literally drive here on Sundays to come to church with me, because they're like, we feel so at home here. And so I think just, you have to put yourself first and realize that this is a choice for you to make and nobody else. And if you feel at home there, then go. And if you don't, find another place, and that's okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, people are very, I mean, even pastors can be like this too. It's like, oh, well, it's got to be my place or their place. First off, it's not your place. No. It's God's place, first off. So it's not, I think that adage of it, like, oh, like, this is my, no, you're being a steward of it, right? Even though I get to lead the college part, that does not mean, oh, it's my T-Rock, this is mine. It's not. You know, it's God's, and he just has put in a season of my life, hey, that you're in a season or you're in a position right now to help guide and lead this ministry in the way that it is. And so I think you should be just very humble with that if you're a leader or volunteering, which is a great step to the next one that you're going to ask too about volunteering. So so it's good though. Yeah,
we can get into it. So the next question that we have, just to kind of wrap it up, is for people who have been attending church for a while, which we talked about, you know, finding your church home, getting into that routine, and people feel like they need to take the next step. What would kind of be your tips or recommendations, or how did you get involved in kind of serving and stuff, and where do you see is the time to do that? All the things.
So I don't think there's not necessarily, I think what stops people, and this is just everything in life, is you need to know if you're ready enough. Right. And that's literally great life advice, but also just Christianity too, is because the opportunities that are presented and stuff like that, you're gonna struggle if you always are going throughout your entire life. Well, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. There was some wise advice given me the other day. Me getting ready to think about marriage and all these other different things. And I asked my dad and other wise counsel, I'm like, hey, do you think I'm ready to be married? Because that's just something that, I'm asking people that are married. And it's a unique and kind of not like a scared question, but just genuinely curious.
Yeah.
And people are going, you're never ready.
Yeah.
Which I'm going, but the reality is what they said after is that you're ready enough. You're mature enough to understand what it takes. You're understanding different things. Now, you may not know everything that's going to go on in your marriage. You're not going to understand those not consequences, but you're not going to understand how heavy it is through, financial situations or just whatever happens in that life or decisions or how to raise kids or whatever it may be. But you understand, you're ready enough for that. Yeah. And that's what you have to answer. And so the question is, okay, well, when did you start serving or how do you start serving? For me, I tell everybody this, and it's so true. I started because of baseball and how it affected my life. I didn't really go to church very much as a kid on Sundays like I did, but it was always around church, or it was always around baseball, sorry. So church was always around, I guess I said it right the first time. I chose baseball first. So if baseball, travel ball in the summer, Sundays, there would be weeks or there'd be months that I didn't go to church because I was at baseball on Sundays. And so I literally started serving to meet girls when I was 17 in high school. And because I was like, oh, I'm single, I'm going to meet a Christian girl there. I never met one there. Now, I did meet Heather here, which was cool, serving while we were on the lead team, but not at that moment. And even though I went in with the wrong intentions, God still used that moment in my life to transform me in understanding, like, this is so important for a while. One lesson that it taught me was there were days where I'm just going, oh, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to do this. But I had signed up to volunteer. I was working with the middle school kids, and I was saying hi and giving them high fives or doing the check-in process with that. And I remember going, but I signed up, and because I honestly went out of duty sometimes. Yeah. And that's like kind of sad to admit, but it was the truth. And in that process, God worked on me in that moment. Now, being volunteering and how that works, for me, that moment changed my whole life of slowly God working on me. And then when I got older, when I went to the family church, they happened to have like a volunteer expo that next week. And or a couple days later, I met Ben Garcia, who was the youth director at that time, when literally I remember to this day, he's still in my contact. Like, he's literally has a photo like this in it, and it's still my cover photo 6 years later. And I joined the team immediately. And then that next time when I came here to Timber Ridge, I literally came on a Sunday, me and my roommate did, and then they were going, oh, you need to come to our T-Rock on a Wednesday. And then we went to T-Rock that night, and I literally started serving. And then, so that's how I kind of got going with it. But I think people are just ready enough, and that's just life in general, because you can't sit there and go, well, Cody, you had experience in volunteering. It doesn't matter. Yeah. There's a place for you with every place, I promise. And on top of it, it just builds a community that is so important. And so I always recommend people to volunteer, not to create less stress on people that do serve and people that are, do this as part of their living. Yeah. But it truly is an impact, and that's the reason why I always recommend it.
I think it's so important. I think literally we talked about this on Sunday at church, was that God calls us to community, and he calls you to be around other people. And for some people that may be volunteering, and for some people that may not be. But I think kind of just to hit on what you hit on was like, you're never going to be like ready to volunteer. I literally had a conversation with a girl on Wednesday who was like, I've just been getting tired and burnt out, and I just needed a moment to just sit and take in church as church, and I needed a moment to just sit in here and not have to serve anybody else. And she's literally one of our top volunteers here, but I told her, I was like, I'm so proud of you for taking that. Like, there will be times even for us where I think we take back and take a weekend or step away from a T-Rock, and we're like, okay, like, there's times where you will always have to step away, and you're never going to jump into ministry or into volunteering and be like, okay, I'm set for the rest of my life. Like, you are going to have to step away at times and refill yourself. But the goal of volunteering and serving at a local church is hopefully to help fill your cup. And so if it's not that, then, if you're not, James and I have conversations about this all the time. If you're not going into serving and volunteering with the right mindset of serving others so that they can reach Christ, then maybe it's not the time for you. Because at the end of the day, yes, serving is a good thing, but if you're getting nothing out of it and you are going into it with the wrong mindset and you're just going into it to check off a box of like, I should be serving, then like, it's pointless. It's, yeah, you're helping, but it's kind of pointless. Like, God doesn't call us to serve just because he wants us to check off one of the boxes to get into heaven. Like, that's not how heaven works, first of all. But also, I think it's just like with reading your Bible or praying or worshiping or all of the things that we talked about. Those are not checklist things. They're things that you do to serve and honor God and to also hopefully help the people around you get to create those relationships with Christ. But if it's not about that for you, and if that's not your mindset at the time, that's okay. But I think it's important to be in that mindset and to go into it with the right intentions, to be able to grow yourself and also grow others around you.
Yeah, and there's also this aspect of understanding that. And by the way, we're running a little long because we're super excited for this first one. We're trying to make these shorter, but this one we don't have a timer yet. We're probably going to put like a little timer in the future of like how long we've been recording for, because Lauren and I both have no idea. But I do want to say that what's important is that when you do start volunteering, especially even when you go on staff, nobody is perfect. And I think people think that the church is like, oh, like people are still going to have the staff. And I want to let you know that there's a moment that changes when you go from like the pew to behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And that is okay. Like there can be people like, oh, they aren't as perfect as it seems because they talk on stage or something like that. Like that is where I've had to struggle with that as when I became a staff at not just necessarily this church, but just in general. Like it's a consistent thing, and you may be saying, "Oh, Cody, that's weird." And that's maybe we could talk about that for a full episode. But understanding like people are still human, they're still going to make mistakes, even in the church. And so when you do start serving and you see, oh, they're frustrating me, going, "Well, I just saw this from the stage," they still going to make mistakes. So I think that's important to understand to get into that too, and that's just in general. But I think it's important to know that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's all the questions that we have. I do have one more question for you that Cody doesn't know about.
Oh, okay.
But what is, just to kind of wrap it up, short and sweet, what is one piece of advice that you wish that you could have told your younger self or somebody kind of going through their young adult stage? What is a piece of advice that you wish you would have known?
Ooh, that's great. I'll say for me that your identity, it's something that Pastor John just said recently, and it was something or someone today is he didn't say running your life, but is guiding your life. There's something that's pushing you. And so that could be God, it could be sports, it could be academics, there could be something that's leading your life and you don't even realize it. And so for me, it was sports and it was baseball. And it took me until I was till baseball ended, but really till I was about 19, 20, 21 years old, was right when I realized that I was identifying baseball as my God, or as identifying it as this is the most important thing in the world. And I think the moment you do that, and people can go their entire life doing that, and they're still going to get into heaven, they're still going to do it, like all that stuff. But the moment that you can fully put your identity in Christ and not worry about that boss and not making that performance goal, and like, yeah, you still have to do things like that, but understanding like you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for him. The moment you do that, oh my goodness, the freedom you feel, the stress off of you, all that stuff, because it doesn't matter as much anymore. Right. And that's what I would say as younger kids, you're so excited, especially if you're a go-getter and you want to like, oh, I want to go do this life, I want to go do this life and this in life. Like you're going to put identity in work, put identity in this. And I think that is all of it. And you could also think it's good things too. I put identity in my kids. I put identity in my marriage, and that is not thing. And I know we're trying to short, but she's right here too, and she's talked about it too. Is Taylor? I remember telling she was like right when Cammie was born, she was like I was identified as like a mother. And it was like just a mother, and like totally natural. Like, and she was like, I realized like that's not who my identity is just being a mom. And obviously we can't relate to that being like a parent side of that, but I feel like that's very natural and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think as soon as you can get back to like, God is my identity, God is the one who's leading my life, and then everything else doesn't mean it just falls in place so easily, but it naturally, life makes more sense. So that's what I would say to my younger self is find whatever is pushing you, whatever your identity is, make sure it is on Christ. And if you don't know, ask people around you.
Amen. Period. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for joining in. I hope that what we were able to share helped you. Thank you, Cody, for coming and joining us. We will see you guys next week. Bye.